Welcome. You're watching Save the Semiquincentennial, America's 250th birthday. Abraham Lincoln's words at Gettysburg are critical today. Well, as I said, 2026, just 3 years from now, is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, if we make it. The MAGA crowd that worships Trump is lost. Nothing will convince them otherwise. Not the upcoming trials, not anything he does or doesn't do. So the work is going to be hard for the rest of us who have not lost our minds. If we're going to save American democracy, well, we can't have this scene repeated next year. Trump has said he has written that he will tear the Constitution up on Inauguration Day. As the unitary executive, he will control the fate of government, the country, and individuals, including you and me. No more majority rule, no more minority rights. Well, the opposite of Trump is Abraham Lincoln. Historians generally agree Lincoln is our greatest president. Trump, almost the worst, but it's early yet. I'm Dave Balog. I am the information officer for 1,000 Moms, and I'm an author on books on science and the brain and other topics, and now books on history and politics to get us ready for next year. When Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office in March of 1861, the Civil War to decide the fate of the nation was just mere weeks away. And in one of the great ironies of history, administering the oath of office to Lincoln was Chief Justice Roger Taney, who a few years earlier had delivered the Dred Scott decision. It was and is considered the worst ruling in American judicial history. It inflamed North versus South views on slavery and figuratively lit a torch on the first cannon shot of the Civil War. So bad a ruling is it that now some law professors won't teach it or they pay minimal attention to it. Well, throughout the Civil War, which killed 600,000 Americans, Lincoln oversaw a painful reckoning that began to resolve the issues of slavery and union. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is one of the most famous speeches ever given. It's stunning in its brevity, 10 sentences, 272 words, and delivered in just over 2 minutes. Well, Lincoln gave the address on November 19, 1863. He was in Gettysburg to dedicate a national military cemetery to the Union soldiers who fell at the Battle of Gettysburg 4 months earlier. Lincoln's words live today and have tremendous meaning today. He called on Americans to solve divisions that threatened the union of the United States. And his message is spot on for today. Well, the North's victory at Gettysburg was one of the pivotal battles of the American Civil War. And Lincoln began his address this way, as we all remember. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent, a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, Lincoln goes back to the signing, not to the signing of the Constitution, but to the Declaration of Independence of 1776. The Constitution, in forming our government, was the product of many compromises, most notably on slavery. In contrast, the Declaration of Independence declares our enduring national values. All men are created equal. The Confederacy literally put into writing that blacks were not created equal to the white man. Lincoln summarizes the American project: liberty for all, equality for all. He continues in his address: now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any other nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln's assertion is twofold. First, the United States is unique. No nation was ever founded on a commitment to liberty and equality, and the Civil War was a trial to see if the nation based on such lofty ideals could survive. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, was the site of the bloodiest battle of America's bloodiest war. In 3 days of fighting, 51,000 Americans on both sides, Union and Confederate, were killed, wounded, captured, or missing. In a larger sense, Lincoln says, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. And Lincoln is not in Gettysburg to set up a celebration or to celebrate the Union victory. Rather, he explains that those who fought were the loyal guardians of the American experiment. Lincoln challenges the bitterly divided nation that we hear highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The Republican Party, for which Lincoln was the first president, was a party created to give voice to poor white men as well as slaves and others. Lincoln was a poor white man himself. He grew up without slaves and without land, which meant you had almost nothing. With only 2 years of education, how does one come from that background and nurture the ideals, the kind of which make this country great? How do you become the leader of this nation, despite being part of an obscure, relatively voiceless Republican Party in the mid-19th century? Well, for Lincoln, the core of capitalism is not about getting rich. It's about getting fairly compensated for your work. It's about being incentivized to do better work, and Lincoln was constantly striving. One of his closest associates said he was the little engine of ambition that wouldn't stop. Lincoln taught himself to read, taught himself to be a lawyer, went through many failed businesses before he even reached that point. He embodied American society that kept trying, failing, then getting up and trying again. Lincoln and the early Republicans sought the right to be secure from being dependent on someone else. Independence, he wrote in his letters when he was very young, meant that he hated being dependent on his father. His father treated him like a slave on the farm, and some people think his hatred of slavery came from that experience. As a riverboat man on the Mississippi, Lincoln saw how badly slaves were treated. Yet Lincoln was no abolitionist at first. He wanted to preserve majority rule. The South had rejected the results of the 1860 election and gone their own way. If he stood for abolition, he would divide the North and lose the war. His road to the Emancipation Proclamation and his moves abolishing slavery took many turns and angered black leaders like Frederick Douglass. Lincoln hated slavery, but wanted it contained. His priority was to save the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation was a measured act of war, a limited first act against slavery. By 1865, Lincoln had embraced the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. He got it passed. Freedom, we often think is this abstract notion of being able to do anything you want. But really, it's ultimately breaking yourself free from the constraints, like very tight dependence on whether it's institutions or on your family or on the expectations of the community or whatever. You want to be able to realize yourself within the constraints of your own ability. Without Lincoln, there would be no United States of America today. He is rightly considered our best and most important president, rightfully called the United States, he rightfully called the United States the last best hope of Earth. It remains so today, barely. Well, read more. Please read more. Start with my book. You can start reading for free 20 Who Made America Great Already, period. Honor them. Vote. Click the link and other links in the description below the video. And to do that, you need to look in the YouTube words, the word more, because you can only get the full description by clicking on the word more. And finally, vote. It's critical, and in a democracy such as the one we have, it's the minimal act of a citizen. Minimal. It's critical to only 60% of Americans vote. And that is part of our problem today. So do what you can. Make sure you're registered. Make sure your family's registered. Make sure your friends are registered. And we'll provide a link in the description, again, a link to the League of Women Voters, where you can register to vote and learn a whole bunch about our electoral process. Well, thank you for watching. I hope it was time well spent. Be kind, be well, be involved.